Zexhai never returned to his home world. 3 days after leaving the Kepler 442 system, he requested emergency reassignment to the furthest observation post in the galaxy. His psychological evaluation had been marked as concerning but not critical. His supervisors approved the transfer without asking questions. The war ended 2 weeks after he left. The news reached him at observation post Omega-7 on the galaxy's rim. A single-line message from the Galactic News Service that changed everything Zexhai thought he knew about how wars were supposed to finish. Kepler 442 conflict concluded. Peace treaty signed. Joint colonization agreement approved. Zexhai read the message 17 times and still could not understand it. Peace treaty. Not surrender terms, not occupation agreements, not reparations and prisoner exchanges. An actual treaty between equals who had decided to stop fighting and start building something together. The detailed reports arrived 3 days later. Zexhai read them in his small observation chamber while alien stars he had never seen before turned slowly outside his viewport. The final battle had never happened. Instead, both fleets had met in the empty space between Haven 7 and its moon for the strangest military conference in galactic history. General Patricia Logan represented human forces. Admiral Kethavan commanded the alien fleet. They met aboard a neutral transport ship to discuss terms for ending a war that neither side seemed capable of winning. The negotiations lasted 6 hours. When they finished, both commanders had agreed to something that violated every rule of interstellar conflict resolution. They decided to share the system instead of fighting over it. The Kepler 442 worlds would be jointly administered by human and Kethmoran colonists. Both species would contribute to development and defense. Profits from mining and trade would be divided equally. Children from both races would attend the same schools and grow up as neighbors instead of enemies. Zexhai tried to understand how such an agreement was possible. Neither side had been decisively defeated. Both fleets were still capable of fighting. Why would they choose cooperation over victory? The answer came in Admiral Kethavan's personal statement to the Galactic Council. We have fought humans for 4 months and learned something that changes everything. They do not fight to conquer enemies, they fight to create friends. Every battle teaches them more about who we are and what we value. Every death shows them what we are willing to sacrifice for. By the end of this war, humans knew us better than we knew ourselves. General Logan's statement was simpler, but somehow more disturbing. We never wanted to take their worlds. We just wanted to prove we deserve to keep ours. The best way to end a war is to show your enemies that they're safer as your allies than as your opponents. Zexhai put down the reports and stared out at the unfamiliar stars. The humans had won by redefining what winning meant. They had conquered their enemies by teaching them that conquest was unnecessary, but the real shock came in his personal communications from Elder Vortham. His old supervisor had been promoted to the council after filing reports about human warfare methods. The promotion came with access to classified information that explained why the Kepler 442 conflict had been so important. Observer Zexhai, you must return immediately for debriefing. Your reports on human psychology have been distributed to every military academy in the galaxy. 3 different species have requested human advisors for their own conflicts. The Council is considering formal alliance with Earth. Zexhai deleted the message without responding. He could not face returning to a galaxy where his observations had made humans into military consultants and political allies. He had watched them fight and die and choose principles over survival. He had seen them honor enemies and rescue civilians and sacrifice themselves for strangers. He could not watch them become another item in the Galactic Council's catalog of useful resources. The final report arrived 6 months later. An analysis of post-war conditions in the Kepler 442 system, prepared by a team of council sociologists and economists. Human Kethmoran cooperation was working. Colonial populations were integrating successfully. Trade agreements were generating wealth for both species. Military cooperation had eliminated piracy and territorial disputes throughout the sector. The joint colonies were becoming a model for interspecies cooperation that other systems wanted to copy. But the report's final paragraph made Zexhai's hands shake as he read it. Long-term psychological studies of Kethmoran personnel who served in the conflict show permanent alterations in behavior patterns. Subjects demonstrate increased empathy toward other species, reduced aggression in competitive situations, enhanced cooperation in group activities. These changes appear to be permanent and may represent the first documented case of one species psychologically transforming another through combat exposure. HFY turned off his computer and walked to the observation deck. Outside his small station, the rim stars burned cold and distant. No ships passed this way. No messages arrived except official reports he no longer read. He had requested the loneliest post in the galaxy because he needed distance from what he had witnessed. But even here, millions of light years from human space, he could not escape. The truth his observations had revealed. Humans did not just fight wars. They used wars to change the people they fought against. Every battle was a lesson in human values. Every death was proof of what they were willing to sacrifice for those values. Every act of mercy was an invitation for enemies to become something better than they had been before. The Kethmorans had been permanently altered by 4 months of fighting humans. They had become more empathetic and cooperative because humans had shown them what empathy and cooperation looked like under pressure. HFY wondered what changes were happening in his own mind. What had months of watching human warfare done to his psychological patterns? What permanent alterations had occurred in his behavior and thinking? He thought about Danny Park dying with grenades in his hands to save people he had never met. About Amy Foster risking everything to rescue civilians who could not help her win. About Ryan Murphy crawling into a collapsing building to save an enemy child. He thought about Commander Jake Murphy ordering ceasefires to bury the dead with honor. About Major Ben Carter sending messages to enemy families. About humans fighting harder for principles than other species fought for survival. The observations had changed him. He knew that now. He could not sleep because his dreams were filled with human voices asking impossible questions. Why do we fight? What are we fighting for? How do we know when we have won enough? HFY had been sent to observe humans at war. Instead, he had learned something far more disturbing. Humans were not at war with their enemies. They were at war with the worst parts of themselves, with their capacity for cruelty and selfishness and cowardice. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning that war too. He wrote his final report in longhand on paper instead of typing it into official channels, a document that would never be filed or distributed or analyzed by council committees. Some observations change the observer more than they reveal about the observed. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone. The humans taught me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right despite the fear. Now I understand why I cannot sleep anymore. I have seen what we could become if we chose to be better than we are. I am terrified we never will. HFY sealed the report in his personal files and continued his watch on the galaxy's edge. Alone with distant stars and the memory of humans who had shown him what it meant to fight for something worth dying for. 2 months into the war, HFY barely slept. His observation reports had become the most classified documents in the Galactic Observation Corps. 3 different council committees demanded daily briefings on human warfare methods. Military academies across the galaxy were studying his recordings. The humans were not just winning anymore. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of how civilized species conducted war. The Battle of Meridian Ridge became the turning point that broke HFY's understanding of military logic completely. The ridge was the highest point on Haven 7's main continent. Whoever controlled it could dominate the surrounding plains with artillery and orbital strikes. Every military textbook said the defenders would hold the high ground at all costs. Colonel Susan Hayes abandoned it without firing a shot. HFY watched in confusion as human forces withdrew from their prepared positions and moved into the valley below. The Kethmorans occupied the ridge easily and began setting up heavy weapons. They had the tactical advantage everyone expected them to want. Then Hayes sprung her trap. The valley was not random terrain the humans had retreated into. It was a carefully prepared killing ground. Every hill had hidden weapon positions. Every stream bed concealed supply tunnels. Every tree line hid soldiers who had been waiting for weeks. When the Kethmorans tried to advance from their high ground positions, they found themselves fighting uphill against enemies who knew every rock and shadow in the valley. Their superior, Technology meant nothing when humans could disappear into terrain they had studied for months. But the real genius was psychological. The Keth Morans had taken the ridge because military doctrine said they should. Hayes had given it to them because she knew they would never expect an enemy to voluntarily surrender the high ground. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Keth Moran force was destroyed, and Hayes had retaken the ridge from defenders who never saw the attack coming. She had won by doing exactly what no rational commander would attempt. Zexhai filed his report and waited for his supervisors to tell him his sensors were malfunctioning again. Instead, he received a message from Admiral Kethvin himself. Observer, Zexhai, you will provide complete tactical analysis of human Colonel Hayes immediately. Kethmoran High Command requires this information for strategic planning. For the first time since the war began, Zexhai realized the Kethmorans were scared. The true horror came 3 days later when Corporal Ryan Murphy died saving a Kethmoran child. The boy was Commander Jake Murphy's younger brother, 22 years old and fresh out of military training. He had volunteered for frontline duty despite his family connections, said he wanted to earn his rank instead of inheriting it. Ryan's unit was clearing a damaged building in the contested city of New Brisbane. The structure had been hit by orbital bombardment during an earlier battle. Most civilians had been evacuated, but sensors detected life signs in the basement levels. The rescue team found a Kethmoran family trapped under debris, a couple with 3 young children who had been hiding in the building when the bombing started. They were enemy civilians in a war zone, but they were also parents with scared kids. Ryan volunteered to crawl through the unstable wreckage and guide them to safety. The building was ready to collapse. Every minute increased the danger. His squad leader ordered him to wait for engineering equipment that could make the rescue safer. Ryan ignored the order and went in anyway. He got the family out one by one. Mother first, father next. 2 older children. The youngest was a girl maybe 6 years old who was too frightened to move. Ryan crawled back into the collapsing building to get her. The roof came down just as he pushed the child through the gap to safety. 2 tons of concrete and steel trapped Ryan Murphy in a space barely large enough for his body. His squad tried to dig him out, but the damage was too severe. Ryan died holding the hand of a Kethmoran child he had never met before that day. Zexhai recorded the entire incident and felt something break inside his mind. War was supposed to be about defeating enemies and taking territory. It was not supposed to be about young soldiers dying to save the children of people they were fighting against. The funeral made everything worse. Commander Murphy learned about his brother's death 3 hours after it happened. Zexhai expected rage or grief or demands for revenge. Instead, Murphy ordered an immediate ceasefire to allow both sides to recover their wounded and bury their dead. The Kethmoran commanders agreed without argument. Even they seemed shaken by what had happened. VI. Service was held in New Brisbane's Central Plaza. Humans and Kethmorans attended together. Ryan Murphy was buried with full military honors while his enemies stood at attention and saluted his coffin. The Kethmoran child he had died saving placed flowers on his grave. Her parents stood with tears in their eyes as Murphy's squad fired the traditional volley over their son's body. When the ceremony ended, Commander Murphy spoke to the gathered crowd. "My brother died doing what he thought was right. He saved a life because that's what good people do. I won't dishonor his memory by forgetting why he made that choice." Zexhai sent his report to Elder Vortham with a personal note attached. "I request immediate reassignment. This war is affecting my psychological stability." The response came back within hours. "Request denied. You are the only observer who understands human warfare methods. Continue mission until further notice." But Zexhai was not sure he understood anything anymore. Every day brought new examples of humans making impossible choices for incomprehensible reasons. They fought harder for principles than other species, fought for survival. They showed mercy to enemies who had shown them none. They honored their opponents even while killing them. The breaking point came during the siege of Fallen Star Station. The orbital facility was humanity's last major stronghold in the system. If it fell, the war would be over. 10,000 human Civilians lived on the station along with the military garrison. General Kethamore offered terms for surrender, safe passage for all civilians, honorable captivity for military personnel, no reprisals or punishment. By galactic law, it was a generous offer that should have been accepted immediately. The humans voted on whether to surrender or keep fighting. Zexhai watched in amazement as the entire population of the station participated in a democratic decision about their own fate. Soldiers and civilians, adults and children. Everyone had a voice in choosing between safety and continued resistance. The vote was not even close. 87% chose to keep fighting. An old woman named Margaret Stone cast one of the deciding votes. She was 93 years old and had lived through 3 different wars on Earth. When asked why she voted to continue fighting, her answer made Zexhai question everything he thought he knew about intelligent behavior. Because if we surrender now, we're telling our children that some things are more important than freedom. I'm too old to live with that choice. The siege lasted 6 weeks. The humans held out not because they had superior weapons or tactics, but because they refused to quit. Every day they could have surrendered. Every day they chose to keep fighting instead. When Kethmoran forces finally breached the station's defenses, they found something that no military manual had prepared them for. The civilians were still there, still voting on whether to evacuate or stay and help with the fighting. Most of them voted to stay. Zexhai stopped writing coherent reports. His daily communications became collections of disconnected observations and half-formed theories. His supervisors demanded explanations, but he had none to give. How do you explain watching a species that treats war like a test of character instead of a contest of strength? How do you describe armies that care more about doing the right thing than about winning? How do you report that humans fight their enemies and themselves at the same time, and somehow manage to win both battles? On the 70th day of the war, Zexhai received his final orders from the Galactic Observation Corps. Return to base immediately for psychological evaluation and reassignment. New observer will replace you within 48 hours. Zexhai read the message and felt relief mixed with something that might have been disappointment. He was going home. He would never have to watch humans die for incomprehensible principles again. But he was also leaving before the story ended. He would never know if the humans won their impossible war or lost it trying to be something better than themselves. As his ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Zexhai took one last look at the Kepler 442 system. Human and Kethmoran fleets still faced each other across the void. Still fighting a war that should have ended months ago. Still proving that some things were more important than victory. 3 weeks into the war, Zexhai had filled dozens of reports, but none of them made sense to his supervisors. Every day brought new examples of human behavior that violated basic military doctrine. Every battle showed tactics that should not work, but somehow did. The humans were not just winning. They were changing how war itself was fought. Captain Amy Foster led the mission that broke Zexhai's understanding completely. The Kethmorans had captured a human research station on Haven 7's northern continent. 200 civilian scientists and their families were being held prisoner. Standard galactic practice said civilians were valuable bargaining chips. They would be released when peace talks began. Foster disagreed. She took 40 soldiers on a rescue mission that made no tactical sense. The research station was surrounded by Kethmoran forces. It was defended by energy cannons and shield generators. Any attack would result in heavy casualties and probably fail. Foster attacked anyway. Zexhai watched through his long-range sensors as the human strike team approached the station in darkness. They moved on foot across 30 kilometers of rough terrain. No vehicles, no air support. Just soldiers carrying rifles and determination. The Kethmorans detected them 5 kilometers from the target. Searchlights swept the landscape. Guard patrols spread out to intercept them. Energy weapons charged and ready. Foster split her team into 4 groups. Each group attacked from a different direction. The Kethmorans had to divide their forces to respond. Classic military distraction, but it still should not have worked against a fortified position. Then Foster did something that made Zexhai question his own eyes. While 3 groups kept the guards busy with fake attacks, she led the 4th group straight through the front gate. Not around it. Not over it. Through it. The humans had studied Kethmoran psychology for weeks. They knew the aliens relied on sensors and automated defenses. They knew Kethmoran guards would never expect an enemy to walk through the main entrance during a battle. Foster's group wore stolen Kethmoran uniforms. They walked past guard posts and sensor arrays like they belonged there. When challenged, they gave correct passwords they had learned by monitoring enemy communications. The rescue took 40 minutes. Foster's team found the prisoners in the station's lower levels. Instead of fighting their way out, they used the station's own emergency evacuation system. Automated pods launched all 200 civilians to safety, while the Kethmorans were still fighting fake attacks on the perimeter. Foster and her soldiers escaped the same way they had entered, through the front gate, while the enemy looked everywhere else. The mission succeeded because Foster understood something about warfare that Kethmorans did not. Sometimes the most direct approach is the least expected. Sometimes walking into danger is safer than trying to sneak around it. But that was not what disturbed HFY the most about the rescue mission. What bothered him was why Foster had attempted it at all. The civilians provided no military value. Rescuing them gained no strategic advantage. The mission risked 40 trained soldiers to save people who were probably safe as prisoners anyway. By any logical measure, it was a waste of resources. Foster disagreed with logic. "We don't abandon people," she told her soldiers before the mission. "We don't calculate whether lives are worth saving. We don't leave anyone behind because it's inconvenient or dangerous." HFY recorded those words and sent them to his supervisors, with a note that human military doctrine seemed to be based on emotional responses rather than rational planning. The response came back quickly. "Impossible. Emotional armies lose wars. Check translation systems." But the translations were correct. Humans really did risk everything to save people who could not help them win. They really did make military decisions based on principles instead of practical benefits. The pattern continued in every battle HFY observed. Lieutenant Kevin Stone's unit got trapped in Meridian Canyon with no way out, surrounded by Kethmoran forces and running low on ammunition. The logical response was surrender. Stone chose a different option. He ordered his 15 soldiers to record final messages for their families. Then he led a charge straight up the canyon walls into the teeth of enemy fire. Not to break the encirclement, not to complete a mission, just because Stone refused to die on his knees. 6 humans climbed a vertical rock face while 40 Kethmorans shot at them. 4 made it to the top and kept fighting. By the time Kethmoran reinforcements arrived, Stone's tiny force had broken their attackers completely. The surviving Kethmoran commander could not explain what had happened. "They should have surrendered," he told his interrogators. "We offered them honorable terms. They chose to die instead." But Stone and 3 of his soldiers had not died. They had climbed an impossible cliff and won an impossible battle through nothing but refusal to accept defeat. When asked why he had ordered the charge, Stone gave an answer that made no sense to anyone except other humans. "Because if we were going to die anyway, we might as well die trying." The psychological warfare was almost worse than the physical battles. Humans had begun broadcasting personal messages to Kethmoran soldiers and their families. Not propaganda, not threats. Simple human communication. Major Ben Carter started the practice after capturing a wounded Kethmoran officer. Instead of interrogating the prisoner, Carter sat with him and talked about normal things: family, home, food, things that had nothing to do with war. "What is your daughter's name?" Carter asked while human medics treated the alien's injuries. "Kethmila," the prisoner answered without thinking. "She is 7 cycles old." Carter smiled and showed him pictures of his own children. "My son is 8. My daughter just turned 5. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up." The Kethmoran officer stared at the human family photos. His green skin turned pale. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to know that I understand," Carter said. "You're fighting for something important to you. So am I. That doesn't make us friends, but it doesn't make us monsters either." Carter began broadcasting messages to Kethmoran families, not to demoralize them but to honor their sacrifice. When Kethmoran soldiers died in battle, Carter would find their names and send word to their relatives that they had fought bravely and died with honor. The practice spread through the human forces. Soon, every unit was keeping records of enemy dead and making sure their families knew they had not been forgotten. HFY could not understand the purpose of this behavior. Honoring dead enemies served no military function. It might actually help enemy morale by showing that their soldiers were remembered and respected. But the effect on Kethmoran troops was the opposite of what logic predicted. Knowing that humans would remember them personally made the war feel different. It was no longer an abstract conflict between faceless armies. It became a series of individual encounters between people who knew each other's names. Some Kethmoran units began requesting transfers to other sectors. Others started deserting entirely. The ones who stayed fought differently, more carefully, less aggressively. They seemed afraid of disappointing enemies who treated them like people instead of targets. HFY sent report after report, trying to explain what he was seeing. His supervisors kept sending back requests for clarification. How could inferior forces defeat superior ones? How could emotional decisions lead to tactical victories? How could treating enemies with respect weaken their will to fight? The questions had no good answers, at least none that fit standard galactic military theory. The 21st day of the war, HFY received new orders from Elder Vortham. Extend observation period indefinitely. Council requires detailed analysis of human psychological warfare methods. Send hourly updates. HFY read the message twice and felt something cold in his stomach. The war was supposed to last 3 days. Now the Council wanted hourly updates on human psychology. That could only mean one thing. The humans were winning and no one understood how or why. The first battle happened on Haven 7, the third planet in the system. HFY watched from orbit as both fleets sent ground forces to the surface. The planet had a small human colony with 50,000 people. Standard galactic law said civilians should be evacuated before fighting started. The humans did not evacuate their people. HFY adjusted his sensors to get a better view of the surface. The Kethmoran dropships landed in perfect formation on the wide plains outside the main colony. 3,000 soldiers in full battle armor, energy rifles charged, personal shields active, heavy weapons ready. The human landing was different. Their ships came down scattered across the landscape. Some landed in the hills, others in the forests. A few touched down right in the middle of the colony itself. Only 800 soldiers total. General Kethmore led the alien ground forces. He was a veteran of many campaigns. His battle record was perfect, never lost a fight, never retreated. His troops advanced in standard formation across the open ground toward the human settlement. HFY watched through his ship's cameras. The Kethmoran advance was beautiful in its precision. Each soldier knew his place. Each squad moved at the exact right speed. Their energy shields made a wall of light that nothing could penetrate. The humans waited in the colony's buildings and streets. No formation, no shields, just soldiers with chemical powder weapons hiding behind walls and in doorways. It looked like a massacre waiting to happen. Then the killing started. The first Kethmoran squad to enter the colony died in 10 seconds. Hidden explosives blew up under their feet. Human soldiers appeared from nowhere and shot them at close range. Then the humans vanished back into the buildings before return fire could hit them. General Kethmore ordered his troops to spread out and be careful. Standard urban warfare doctrine. Clear each building slowly. Watch for traps. Use heavy weapons to destroy cover. The humans had different ideas about how urban warfare should work. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez led a squad of 12 humans in what looked like a suicidal charge straight into the Kethmoran center. Her soldiers carried no heavy weapons, no armor, just rifles and explosives they had made themselves. HFY expected to watch them die. Instead, he saw something that made no sense. The human charge broke through 3 Kethmoran positions in 15 minutes. Not because they had better weapons or more soldiers. They won because they did things no sane military force would try. Private Danny Park climbed onto a building roof and started shooting down at Kethmoran troops. When they shot back, he jumped to another roof. When they followed him, he led them. into an alley where his friends were waiting with more homemade bombs. The Kethmorans tried to surround him, but Danny had studied the colony layout for years. He knew every street and passage. He knew which walls were thin enough to shoot through. He knew where the old drainage tunnels connected. For 2 hours, Danny Park held off an entire Kethmoran company by himself. He moved through the colony like he was part of it. When his rifle ran out of bullets, he used a pistol. When the pistol was empty, he threw rocks and bottles. When the Kethmorans finally cornered him on a rooftop, Danny smiled and pulled the pins from 4 grenades at once. The explosion killed him and 16 enemy soldiers. Zexhai stared at his screens and tried to understand what he had just seen. Soldiers were supposed to want to live. They were supposed to retreat when outnumbered. They were supposed to surrender when defeat was certain. Danny Park had been 19 years old. The pattern repeated across the colony. Human soldiers who should have died kept fighting. When surrounded, they found ways to escape. When trapped, they took enemies with them when they died. When wounded, they kept shooting until they passed out. Captain Ross Norton led 30 humans against 200 Kethmorans in the colony's power station. The aliens had better weapons and armor. They should have won easily. Instead, Norton turned the power plant into a fortress. His people knew exactly how to use the machinery as cover. They knew which pipes contained steam and which held toxic. The Kethmorans had to advance through narrow passages between huge generators. The humans picked them off one by one. When the aliens tried to use heavy weapons, Norton's people shut down the power grid and fought in darkness. The battle lasted 6 hours. Norton lost half his soldiers, but the Kethmorans never took the power plant. When General Kethmor finally ordered a retreat, only 40 of his 200 attackers were still alive. But the real shock came when Zexhai watched the humans treat their prisoners. Galactic warfare rules said captives should be held until prisoner exchanges could be arranged. The humans did something else entirely. Commander Jake Murphy came down to the planet's surface after the battle. He walked through the colony looking at the damage and the bodies. Kethmoran and human dead lay mixed together in the streets. Murphy found the captured Kethmoran soldiers in the colony medical center. Human doctors were treating their wounds. The same doctors who had been working on human casualties all day. Why? Asked Colonel Kethjin, the senior surviving Kethmoran officer. His leg was broken and his armor was burned, but he was alive. Murphy sat down next to the alien's bed. Why what? Why are your doctors helping us? We came here to kill you and take your world. Murphy looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes and his uniform was covered in dust and blood. Because you're hurt and we're doctors. That's what doctors do. Kethjin stared at the human commander. This makes no sense. We are enemies. You were enemies an hour ago, Murphy said. Right now, you're patients. When you get better, we'll figure out what comes next. Zexhai recorded every word and sent his report to Elder Vortham. He tried to explain what he had seen, but the words felt inadequate. How do you describe watching inferior forces defeat superior ones through pure determination? How do you report that humans treat war like a personal challenge instead of a business transaction? The response came back quickly. Impossible. Check your sensors. Run diagnostic on recording equipment. Kethmorans do not lose to primitive forces. But Zexhai's equipment was working perfectly. His recordings were accurate. The humans had won their first major battle against a galactic military power. They had done it with chemical weapons and homemade explosives and something that could not be measured by any sensor. That night, Zexhai watched the humans bury their dead. They dug graves for their own soldiers first. Then they dug graves for the Kethmorans who had died. The same ceremonies, the same honors. Enemy and friend side by side in the colony cemetery. Sergeant Rodriguez spoke at the service. She had survived the battle, but lost half her squad. Danny Park was the best soldier I ever knew. He died protecting people he had never met. That's what we do. That's who we are. Then she said something that made Zexhai's skin crawl with strange emotions. The Kethmoran soldiers who died today were also brave. They came here fighting for something they believed in. We killed them because we had to, but we honor them because they deserved honor. Zexhai turned off his recording equipment and sat in the darkness of his ship. His first day observing human warfare was over. He had 3 more days of reports to write and send to his supervisors, but already he knew this war was going to be different than anyone expected. HFY sat in the observation chamber and stared at the data pad in his green hands. The assignment looked simple enough. Watch humans fight, write reports, file them with the Galactic Observation Corps. Easy work for a young xenobiologist fresh out of training. Elder Vortham stood behind him with all 4 arms crossed. The old supervisor's skin showed the pale blue of deep thought. He had been doing this job for 300 cycles and had seen every type of species the galaxy had to offer. The humans are new to Space War, Vortham said in his deep voice. They have been in the galactic community for only 50 cycles. Before that, they fought only themselves on their homeworld. HFY nodded and looked at the images on his screen. Human ships looked crude and rough, metal plates welded together, engines that burned chemical fuel instead of clean plasma, weapons that fired solid metal instead of energy beams. Everything about them seemed backward and primitive. Why do we need to watch them fight the Kethmoran Empire? HFY asked. The Kethmorans will win in days. Their ships are better. Their weapons are stronger. They have more soldiers. Vortham made the clicking sound that meant he was thinking. The Council wants records of how new species handle their first real space war. Humans have been expanding, fast. They claim new worlds every cycle. Some Council members think they might be dangerous. HFY looked at the human ship designs again. The vessels were small and simple. No energy shields, no quantum drives, no plasma cannons. He could not see how they could be dangerous to anyone. The Kethmorans asked humans to stay away from the Kepler 442 system, Vortham continued. Humans said no. Now both sides are sending war fleets. The battle will happen in that system. The young observer felt excitement in his chest. This would be his first real assignment. Most new Corps members spent cycles watching boring trade disputes or simple territorial agreements. A real shooting war was rare and important. Vortham handed him a small device. Your ship is ready. It has full cloaking and long-range sensors. Stay far from the battle. Record everything. Send reports every day. Do not get involved no matter what happens. HFY took the device and felt its weight. Inside was all the data he needed about human and Kethmoran forces. Ship counts, weapon types, battle histories. The humans had never fought anyone but themselves. The Kethmorans had won 12 major wars against other species. How long do you think the war will last? HFY asked. 3 days. Maybe 4 if humans are stubborn. Vortham's skin turned the orange of certainty. Kethmorans are professional soldiers. They fight in perfect formation. Their tactics are proven. Humans are amateurs. 2 hours later, HFY sat in his observation ship watching the Kepler 442 system through long-range sensors. The space around the system was empty, except for a few cargo ships fleeing the area. Soon it would fill with warships and death. His ship's computer beeped, detecting hyperspace emergent signatures, multiple contacts. The first fleet to arrive was Kethmoran. 12 heavy cruisers and 30 smaller ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed with polished metal and energy shields. Each ship moved in exact position with the others. No wasted motion, no disorder. Admiral Kethvin broadcast a message on all frequencies. This system belongs to the Kethmoran Empire by right of first discovery. Any hostile forces will be destroyed. HFY made notes on his datapad. Standard Kethmoran doctrine. Make a show of force, demand surrender, attack if refused. He had read about their methods in his training. They always won because they never took chances. His sensors detected more hyperspace signatures. The human fleet was arriving. What came out of hyperspace made HFY blink in surprise. The human ships looked even worse up close. Rust stains on the hulls, mismatched parts, weapons mounted anywhere they would fit. The fleet moved in loose groups instead of tight formation. But there were a lot of them. 60 ships where intelligence reports said there should be 30. HFY checked his sensors twice. The readings were correct. The human fleet commander sent his own message. This is Commander Jake Murphy of the Earth Defense Force. This system is under human protection. You have 1 hour to leave. Zexai could hear Kethmoran laughter on their comm channels. 1 hour to leave. Humans were giving ultimatums to one of the galaxy's major military powers. Admiral Kethvin responded quickly. You are outgunned and outclassed. Surrender now and we will allow you to retreat with honor. Commander Murphy's reply came back just as fast. We don't retreat. We don't surrender. This is our space now. Leave or we'll make you leave. The Kethmoran ships began moving into attack formation. Their movements were smooth and coordinated. Each captain knew exactly where to go. Zexai had studied their battle formations in school. The double crescent was their favorite. It put maximum firepower on target while protecting their flanks. The human ships scattered in all directions. Some moved toward the planet. Others headed for the system's edge. A few small groups charged straight at the Kethmoran center. It looked like complete chaos. Typical human disorganization, Zexai said to himself and made more notes. This would be over quickly. But something bothered him. The human movements looked random, but his computer was tracking patterns. The ships that went toward the planet were not running away. They were setting up defensive positions around the human colony. The ones at the system edge were blocking escape routes. The groups charging the center were not attacking. They were creating diversions. Zexai frowned and ran the numbers again. If the human plan was what he thought it was either brilliant or completely insane. Maybe both. The Kethmoran fleet finished forming up and began their attack run. Plasma cannons charged, missile tubes loaded, energy shields at maximum power. Everything by the book. Commander Murphy broadcast one final message. All human ships, this is it. Remember what we're fighting for. Remember who we're protecting. Show them what humans can do. The first shots were fired 10 minutes later.